a hidden letter that changed an entire industry. It began with a message that was never meant to be found. A single letter, buried in a stack of forgotten documents, written by someone who understood the industry's future long before anyone else dared to imagine it. No headlines, no fanfare, just ink on paper. Yet the ideas inside it would quietly reshape everything. To understand why this letter mattered, we need to return to a moment when the industry was drowning in its own certainty. Executives insisted their systems were flawless. Analysts praised the stability of long-standing practices. Innovation had stalled beneath the weight of tradition. Everyone believed the future would look exactly like the past. This story matters now because transformation rarely begins with breakthrough. It begins with an idea, uncomfortable, unconventional, ignored by the people who need it most. And in this case, the idea came from a mind industry dismissed as irrelevant. The first reveal begins with the author of the letter, a mid-level researcher whose name carried no influence. He wasn't a visionary in the public sense. He wasn't celebrated. But he had spent years studying the inefficiencies nobody talked about, the blind spots that cost the industry billions, the processes that persisted only because they were old enough to be trusted. One evening, frustrated by another meeting where his suggestions were brushed aside, he wrote a private memo, not a complaint, not a manifesto, a blueprint. It detailed flaws in the industry's architecture and a radical solution that could cut through decades of stagnation. It wasn't perfect, but it was bold. The second reveal came when the letter landed by pure accident on the desk of an executive known for ignoring anything outside his immediate priorities. He scanned it briefly, misunderstood its purpose, and filed it away without a second thought. The idea that could have changed everything was buried instantly, left to grow cold in a drawer no one opened. The third reveal surfaced years later when a junior analyst, searching for unrelated records, stumbled upon the forgotten memo. He read it once, then again, stunned by how accurately it predicted the problems the industry was facing now. Problems that had grown so severe that leaders believed they were unsolvable. In the span of a few pages, he realized the industry's future had once been mapped out in silence and ignored. The analyst brought the letter to his supervisor, expecting shock, urgency, maybe even excitement. Instead, he received confusion, skepticism, a vague promise to review it later. The industry had grown so dependent on established methods that even a hint of a new one felt like disruption. And in a world built on old systems, disruption is treated like danger. Still, he couldn't ignore what he had found. The memo didn't just diagnose the industry's core inefficiencies. It offered a blueprint years ahead of its time. It identified bottlenecks no one had addressed. It proposed a framework that could reduce operational waste, improve accuracy, and open the door to innovations the industry now desperately needed. But presenting it was one thing. Convincing anyone to act was another. The conflict deepened when the analyst compared the memo's predictions with current performance metrics. The alignment was uncanny. Every failure the industry now struggled to contain had been outlined in that forgotten document. System delays, resource misallocation, market distortions caused by outdated processes. It was all there, written by someone whose name had been erased from memory. He pushed harder, raising questions in meetings. But questions were inconvenient. They hinted at past mistakes. They implied leadership had overlooked a solution that could have saved billions. Executives dismissed the memo as irrelevant. Old ideas, they said. We've moved beyond that. But the analyst knew the opposite was true. The industry had been moving in circles, mistaking routine for progress. As he continued digging, he uncovered something more troubling. The author of the memo had tried to present his ideas years earlier, quietly, respectfully, but his proposals had been blocked by those protecting their influence. His suggestions weren't rejected because they were flawed. They were rejected because they threatened the structure of power. The tension rose another notch when the analyst discovered early drafts of the memo, along with meeting notes that hinted at internal resistance. Certain executives had feared that implementing the ideas would weaken their control over key processes. The innovation wasn't ignored by accident. It had been buried intentionally. The analyst realized he wasn't dealing with a forgotten document. He was dealing with a suppressed one, determined to understand the full picture. He contacted former employees, searching for anyone who knew the researcher behind the memo. What he found surprised him. The researcher had left the industry entirely, disillusioned after years of being unheard. His ideas, once dismissed, were now more relevant than ever, but the people who needed them still refused to acknowledge the truth. As the analyst prepared to bring the memo into the open, resistance tightened. Reports he requested disappeared. Meetings were canceled. A quiet message reached him from someone deep inside the organization. Be careful. Some ideas were buried for a reason. It wasn't a warning of danger. It was a warning of disruption. And the industry was not ready for what the forgotten letter would expose. Inside the organization, the pressure around the memo grew heavier with every passing day. Departments that once shared information freely now guarded data behind layers of permissions. Conversations paused when the analyst entered the room. Leaders who previously encouraged curiosity suddenly pushed for compliance. It was clear. The memo had reopened something the industry had tried hard to forget. He continued digging anyway. Each new document he recovered revealed more evidence that the researcher's ideas weren't merely innovative. They were transformative. They addressed foundational issues that had been patched, ignored, or misrepresented for decades. The memo proposed replacing inefficient legacy systems with streamlined architectures that could predict errors, reduce costs, and improve transparency. It wasn't just a proposal. It was a roadmap for the future, written long before the future arrived. The conflict sharpened when he discovered email records between executives from years earlier. They discussed the memo not as a potential breakthrough, but as a threat. Implementing it would require restructuring departments, decentralizing authority, and exposing inefficiencies they had spent years defending. The memo had threatened comfort. It had threatened control, and so it had been buried. The analyst felt the weight of that decision every time he compared the memo's insights with the industry's current failures. The same problems persisted, amplified now by scale. Cost ballooned. Processes broke under pressure. Customers suffered delays that leaders brushed off with polished statements. But behind the scenes, frustration grew. Whispers circulated. People knew something was wrong. They just didn't know why. The buildup intensified when the analyst met the former researcher face-to-face. The man was older now, quieter, carrying the kind of stillness that comes from being right for too long, without anyone listening. When shown the memo he thought the world had forgotten, he didn't react with bitterness, only a quiet sadness. They didn't reject the idea, he said. They rejected the change it required. That sentence echoed in the analyst's mind. The memo hadn't been a misstep in innovation. It had been a mirror held up to an industry that didn't want to see its own flaws. As the two spoke, the analyst realized something even more significant. The researcher had continued refining the ideas privately, not to sell them, not to prove anything, but because he believed the industry would eventually reach a breaking point where outdated systems could no longer sustain their weight. And now, staring at the current data, the analyst saw those pressure points everywhere. When he returned to his office, he found a message waiting for him, a short directive from upper management. Discontinue all inquiries related to the archive memo. Focus on current priorities. He read it twice. It wasn't just a dismissal. It was a line drawn in the sand. Yet even as the organization tightened its grip, forces outside began to shift. Independent researchers published reports echoing the memo's old warnings. Competitors started exploring new frameworks. Cracks appeared in the industry's long-standing certainty. What had once been rejected now aligned perfectly with the needs of the moment. The analyst realized the window was closing. Either the truth would surface now, or the industry would continue down a failing path until the cost of inaction became catastrophic. He made his decision, and the moment he chose to move forward, everything around him began to accelerate. He knew the organization would try to stop him, so he didn't wait. He bypassed internal channels and presented the memo's findings directly to an audience that couldn't be silenced, the industry's largest independent conference. No permissions, no rehearsed speeches, just the truth, supported by data, evidence, and the quiet logic that had held up for years. When he finished, the room fell silent, not in dismissal, but in recognition. Engineers saw solutions to problems they had battled for decades. Analysts saw clarity in metrics that had long confused them. Innovators saw a framework that could propel the industry forward. For the first time since the memo was written, the idea received what it always deserved: attention. The climax came hours later, when the presentation spread online. Researchers tore into the details. Think tanks published immediate reviews. Competing firms began requesting access to the underlying models. What had once been buried now ignited a wave of curiosity across the sector. The industry's old gatekeepers tried to downplay the findings, but momentum had already shifted. The memo was no longer a secret. It was a spark. Inside the organization, leadership scrambled. They released statements questioning the analysts' unauthorized disclosure. They attempted to frame the memo as outdated, but the market wasn't buying it. Too many experts had validated the ideas. Too many failures matched the memo's predictions. And too many voices, independent, credible, unaligned, called for change. Pressure from outside forced change inside. Board members demanded explanations. Regulators asked why the memo had never been explored. Clients questioned the years of inefficiencies they had quietly absorbed. Leaders who once dismissed innovation now championed it loudly, hoping to rewrite their own place in the story. Meanwhile, departments quietly began adopting pieces of forgotten blueprint, implementing improvements that transformed workflows overnight. The resolution unfolded not in a triumphant announcement, but in the slow, steady shift in industry facing its own reflection. The memo didn't topple giants. It didn't spark chaos. Instead, it reminded people of something they had forgotten. Progress requires humility. Systems must evolve. Ideas deserve examination, not burial. As the industry modernized, the analyst visited the researcher one last time. He showed him the changes taking shape, the new frameworks, the updated systems, the sudden appetite for innovation. The old man smiled, not with vindication, but with relief. "Good," he said. "It was never about credit. It was about direction." The industry moved forward because one forgotten letter finally reached the people willing to listen, and the lesson left behind was unmistakable. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs are buried not by failure, but by fear of change. So what do you think? Are we repeating the same mistake again?